Hi, everybody. My computer has been running really slow, so I had to restart it. So I do apologize for the 3-minute delay, which isn't really that big of a deal, but I hope you guys are doing well. How have you actually been? I have been unfortunately sick again. I got sick um, and like maybe a week and a half ago, I think. And luckily it's kind of cleared up. But again, I may be coughing. Can you guys hear me by any chance? Hi, Chris and Gary. I hope you guys can hear me. Hey, John. All right, you guys can hear me. So as I was saying, I have been sick again. It's been really annoying, but I'm surviving. I'm still alive. But I may be coughing a bit, so I apologize in advance again. Okay, well, for some reason my computer's running really slow, and that may be accounting for why I'm breaking up a bit. Yeah, so Gary asked, like, yes, wondering if the longer term impact on your respiratory system is a factor. Probably. I actually don't know if there's permanent damage based off, because I've been battling this illness for almost 4 months now. So I don't know if there's permanent damage, and so at any time that I get a cold, I may have respiratory problems again. Either way, this is horrific. It's horrid. Would not recommend. Stay home, guys. That's really important. I know that it's spreading like wildfire right now, especially in the United States, because our leadership is incompetent, or they're competent but only working for the 1%. And this is obviously true. It's the latter. And so they want to maintain businesses being open and putting people's lives at risk, essentially killing people too, because who cares about peons, right? Who cares about the workers? Yeah, I want to stop being sick. So have any of you guys gotten sick at all by any chance? Because I don't know if I'm the only one experiencing what I have for as long as I have. I think it's abnormal, because from, again, everything that I've read, it's like 2 weeks, maybe up to a month. But I haven't heard anything about 3 months, 4 months. They argue, so Gary mentions again that they argue the reason why they're keeping the businesses open, or keeping kind of the opening schedule in place, is because they're arguing that the low mortality, they argue low mortality, which is a stupid argument, right? Again, they're willing to sacrifice people's lives for for the 1%, for the people that money flows up to the top, right? It's outlandish. And once this hopefully ever ends, I think we should hold those people in governmental positions accountable. And I'm serious, because this is not okay. They have killed, I know that it's over 120,000 people now just in the United States. And that's probably rising. Steve Alvarez Blues asks, hi, Andie, you feeling better? I am feeling better. Again, I am still coughing a little bit, which is why my throat's like, feels like I have a frog in it. J-Dog, my mother became very tired from her cancer treatment today. She says it's unusual. Oh, so like a fatigue issue, because that could be something. You don't want to, of course, freak out or anything like that. I would not recommend doing that. Hopefully she gets better and she doesn't have any of the problems that I have had. If she does have this, and she survives through it, just make sure you watch her. Okay, so Gary Presley also mentions, you're making a lot of good points. They should be reminded of their personal responsibilities in these decisions and not be let off with the quote unquote mad Trump excuse. 100% agree. Some of these governors who have decided to, like the governor of Texas, governor of Florida, Arizona too, like these hot spots, they have basically capitulated to Trump and said like, yeah, well, of course we'll stay open. They wanted to get basically political favor with him. And look how many people are infected now. Because the infection rate has increased, you're going to expect a lag right now, regarding if there's any deaths that would occur from the current infections that are taking place. So just because, okay, J-Dog says that it's 130,000 plus now, apparently, in the United States alone. I don't know if the mortality rate has improved. I saw maybe it's anywhere between 0.015 to 0.05. And that may be changing as we progress through this. So formerly Rod Line asks a question. They say that you can hold the politicians accountable, can we? What do you do about the businesses that want to be open and some of those are smaller? How do you hold them accountable? So here's my impression of small businesses. Small businesses should not be necessarily held accountable for this. I have an exception to this. The US government should have given them money so that they can maintain their business and have everything shut down regardless, as well as given additional funds to the populace. Because again, we're seeing a massive layoff again, massive layoffs taking place. And that's my understanding. However, when they need to be held accountable is when, I think in there's a few states, I know it's in my state too, where employers, if they called their employee back to come back to work, even if the employee declined and said, hey, I don't want to come in right now, it's too dangerous, I can get sick, the employer is allowed to basically tattle on these employees to the United States government, and so that they no longer get unemployment benefits. And that is the type of businesses that absolutely need to be held accountable regardless, like shut them down type of thing. They do not need to be operating. I wish, if you guys know of anybody who's had that happen, convince them to make a list of businesses that have done this to their employees. Because I think we as consumers, because we live in a consumer-based economy, kind of, we have a right to know if we want to have, do business with these terrible business owners. I personally would never, ever, ever purchase from them or purchase a service or do anything if I know what the business is, if they've done this to their employee, because they are bad people. If they do this to their employee, imagine what they would do to their customer. So today I'm talking about this concept. It's called a brown paper bag test. And what brought this up to me is a couple of days ago, I was on Twitter. Do you guys know Gun Girl? I don't know her name at all. I should, but I don't. There was an image on Twitter, and a man quote tweeted that image, and it had Gun Girl with an AR, but it also had a Black woman with an AR. And her hair was, to be fair, it was kind of messy. And the man who quote tweeted was a Black man. And he basically said, instead of saying anything about the situation, I'm actually pro Second Amendment, by the way, but instead of criticizing maybe anything regarding that, he criticized the woman's hair. And basically said that she was a bad person because of the way in which she had her hair. Now, some of you may not be aware of this, but how you wear your hair, what you do to your hair within the Black community, it's almost an obsession. It is, it's insane. There's a lot of products that people buy just to make sure that they have their hair in some kind of way that they find acceptable. It is a big deal. It's a big industry too within the Black community. And so formerly Rodline says, "I have no hair, sad face." So what we saw with this woman who her hair was a mess, to be fair, is Black hair is very fragile too. It breaks really easily. And she had her hair pulled back really tight, but you could see maybe the wind was blowing or something, but her hair was sticking up straight from her forehead and it was broken. Like it was this short on her head, like this, just sticking out. And so you could see that her hair was broken. And so a lot of people were there commenting about her hair and also how she must be a terrible person because of her being associated with Gun Girl, but also her hair. And I jumped in and I said, "Hey, her hair should not define her. If you guys have a problem with the way in which she's by Gun Girl, maybe she's promoting the AR, and you personally are not pro Second Amendment, that's okay. Criticize that. But her hair does not define her or does not indicate anything about her actions or her decisions." And I got a lot of pushback for that comment, to be fair. They basically said, "Well, you ain't Black." This is what the paper bag test is. It is it's odd. So it's where the Black community identifies maybe lighter skinned people within their own community, or even biracial people that are part of both communities of both white and Black America, and they exclude them and they say that they are not allowed to comment on these things, even though they may have the same hair, they may have the same skin tone, whatever. They are not allowed to comment on these things because they themselves are not Black, and therefore they do not belong within that community. And this is a thing that I have experienced throughout my entire life as far as this is concerned. But I wanted to kind of look it up a little bit more to figure out why this phenomenon takes place. And I found something very interesting. So it's called the brown paper bag test because the idea is if you are the color of this or lighter, something should happen. If you are the color of this, if you are darker than this color, something else should happen. And the reason why I'm saying something else should happen is because, and not really identifying here, is because this test originates, again, within the Black community. There's some indication that it may have started in the 19th century and kind of went through the 20th century in the original way in which it was intended, which was to exclude dark people. It started out in New Orleans as a tradition, or as a basically thing to do to exclude darker skinned people from churches, from joining sororities, fraternities, all of those things within the Black community that should be safe havens for everybody. It was excluded, it was used by that community to exclude darker skinned people. I wasn't able to really find when the reversal happened, as far as excluding lighter skinned people, but its original concept, how it was used, is indicative of something very interesting within our society. And that is basically how the Black community has over time handled white supremacy outside of Jim Crow laws and things like that. It's almost as if they have this idea that if you are lighter, well, for the original intention of this test, right, in the earlier form, if you had lighter skin, the idea was that you must be smarter, you have some intellectual superiority over darker skinned individuals. You have basically social superiority over these darker skinned individuals. And there's some data on this to actually back that up. There are tests that were conducted, or just social experiments basically, that were done throughout various places. I think one was a law professor from Vanderbilt, and a few other things about like job placement, criminality, and things like that. If you are a darker skinned individual, like dark, versus my skin, which is lighter brown, and I commit and I murder somebody, or I've at least been like gone through the court process, and I'm there in front of the judge to basically get my sentence handed down to me. Lighter skinned dark people, which is kind of weird to say, but lighter skinned dark people are less likely to get the death penalty than dark skinned individuals. So there's a big gap here, and there is reason to be upset because of white supremacy here. People with lighter skin are more likely to get hired. If Black people are hired at all, it will be the lighter skin ones. They're more likely to get higher pay from the gate over their dark skinned counterparts. And this is not exclusive to the United States. This happens all over the world. And a big place that this happens is in India. Same phenomenon will take place. Now, this isn't a brown paper bag test in India. It is basically light skin, dark skin. But the whole thing that I'm actually discussing here is a concept called colorism. And that just basically means that there is a hierarchy of color based off racial color within a certain community. That's what colorism is. I'm sorry, I was just reading some comments here. And so yeah, there's that. And there is evidence to back up that hierarchy, at least within our society and even India, does take place. Now, I can't speak for Europe, I can't speak for Africa or any other continents, but I can say that it absolutely does take place in the United States. And I don't know, I couldn't find when that flip happened as far as this brown paper bag test is concerned. I have no idea, but currently it's used as a way to basically exclude people who are light skinned from a community that should understand where they're coming from, because just because you're a light-skinned brown person doesn't mean the cops don't follow you around, doesn't mean that when you go in stores you don't get followed by the store owner, even, because you do. I have had that experience multiple times, and it's uncomfortable. But at the same time, when you reach out to people that absolutely know that experience, you can't really it's like you don't have the right to even tell them that you have the same experiences just because you have lighter skin. And I think that we should be over this by now, right? I can't be the only one. And I believe, because of the circles that I follow on Twitter, these were supposed to be progressives, right? And so the fact that when I jumped into the conversation, and then I was told, well, you're not Black, so you can't speak on these things. You can't tell me that just because her hair is a mess, or just you can't tell me that I should just ignore her hair and focus on whatever else criticism that I may have. You don't have that right. And it's used as a slur. Like, nobody literally holds up a bag to your skin anymore. They used to, when it was the reverse, when it was intended to exclude dark people, they did. But now it is considered a slur. And I'm not really sure why it's still being evoked, because it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe if you guys have an idea, maybe somebody could enlighten me as to why this is still happening, why because it seems like the best way that we can remove that hierarchy, right, is to basically stop participating in it. And if we, as best as we can, we can't influence necessarily other individuals, but we certainly have some responsibility in it ourselves. We can't influence how maybe the white community treats people of color. We don't necessarily have a lot of pull there, but we can influence it with internally. That way, that hierarchy dissolves and goes away. And maybe there will be an influence in other communities because a whole entire community no longer abides by the hierarchy. Does that make sense? Okay, so formerly Rod Line asked, do you believe if you aren't Black, you have a right to comment? Or are you talking light within that community only? I don't understand the last question, so you may have to clarify. I don't necessarily believe that you don't have a right to comment if you're not Black. That is what some Black people legit believe, apparently. I've had this experience a lot. But I think that everybody has a right to comment. If you, for instance, with this woman's hair, when she was next to Gun Girl with her own AR, if you have a problem with her, armed, let's focus on that, because your hair should not define you as a human being. So Torrential Rage mentions that people join hierarchy as a response to discrimination. So the Italians were accepted after World War II, and now many in New York are racist Trump supporters. That doesn't surprise me. That there was the same thing that happened during Reconstruction and a little bit afterwards with the Irish too. The same phenomenon took place. But it just seems like it's interesting because I was watching, I don't know where I heard this, but it was basically about flexible categories because white isn't a culture, right? And so as a flexible category of race, the white race, whatever that is, it's capable of expanding. So at one point, Italians weren't considered part of the same community as, white people. Well, now they are, because it has that flexibility, because there is no definitive culture. There is no even definitive marker beyond lighter than a brown person, that's nothing. But it's very easy to identify dark people and who they are. You can identify somebody from any part of Asia, Africa, South America, based on skin tone. And, there's differences there. And there is distinct cultures that come along with those things, just because of them being regionally separated. But because of the white race, whatever that is, it has that ability to expand. Maybe someday we can get over this and no longer have race, because it's really not, it should not be an issue to begin with. I would love to see that. I don't understand, formerly Rodline, I don't understand your next question, which was, or are you talking light within that community only? I don't understand that. Christopher Freeman mentions that there's a great book on this called The Color Complex. It talks about intra-racial racism. Okay, so Christopher, if you're still here, I have a question for you, because there has been some argument going on about racism and versus colorism. So colorism is something within the race. And there is an idea by a lot of maybe sociologists and a lot of people from African American studies that argue that, at least within the United States, a person of a minority group is incapable of being racist. They can be colorist, but they cannot be racist because they do not have the power that comes with having some sort of racial superiority over an entire other race, like quote unquote white people do. That seems there's a different power dynamic there versus within one's own community, and talking about like just the various tones within it. Maybe you can highlight that or mention that. John Wise says, I think Candace Owen explains current situation very well. That would surprise me if she does, because she's not very bright when it comes to these things. It's weird. She maybe used to be, but then when she decided to grift a bit and, basically say it's okay to be racist, right wingers, you're good because I'm your one Black friend. She gave that permission to them. And so I do not look upon her very favorably for doing that, just because I know that she's insincere too about it. She's not sincere at all. So I cannot trust anything that comes out of her mouth. Is she cognizant of racial issues within communities and outside of communities, or is she not cognizant of it? Because she doesn't really act cognizant of it. So that would surprise me if she did, but I would be up to at least seeing if she had something to say about that. I know that a lot of, when she goes on debate, she kind of gets owned a lot by people like Killer Mike or something like that, regarding race in the United States. Christopher Freeman says, I think it's definitely possible to be racist within a race. Darker Black people used to get the brunt of it, but lighter Black people also get it these days. I just think that it's strange because even darker, I remember growing up and Black people would look upon really dark Black people very negatively. And it was almost, they would say stuff like, hey, you're so dark, you're purple, and which is absurd to think about if to say, but it was not meant to be a compliment either. And this was only like a few years ago where I've heard these things, and I've never said it myself, but I have definitely been around other people who have said it to very dark skinned individuals. And so it definitely does occur both ways, it seems like. There's also this ballerina, and she's a very strong dancer. She's biracial. And she's basically the head dancer of the American Ballet Company, which is a big deal, which means that, if you think of Broadway plays or any type of play, she's the star. She's basically the person that will be in most of the big, heavily produced productions and things like that. Like, she is the main focus of that company as far as the woman ballerina is concerned, or the dancer. And she is biracial, but you will see, go to her Twitter. Like, if I remember her name, I'll tell you, but you go to her Twitter and she gets attacked by everybody just based off of her skin tone, and told that she isn't Black, even though she's clearly a Black woman. I mean, she definitely looks Black to me, and she's being told this thing because she's on the sole basis that she's biracial. And maybe she's doing something that a lot of Black people don't get the opportunity to do, which is be a ballet dancer. That's a big deal. I'm trying to show your comment, Christopher. Christopher Freeman says, you're right. Calling someone Black back in the day was considered an insult to other Black people. It's crazy. Yeah, it's definitely transforming a lot, and it's hard to keep up with sometimes. But it's definitely an interesting dynamic that's occurring. And again, the data against very dark-skinned individuals hasn't subsided, at least in the United States. It is still a phenomenon that's occurring. They are still getting, the death penalty more frequently than others. They are still getting hired less frequently than others. All of those things that impact an entire community, it will feed down to them, of course, but it just shows you that there is a preference in our society for light skin. It's a Eurocentric preference that everybody may have a little bit of that going on, and it's very sad. Who are you talking to? John Y says, I got to do more research on the United States. Sorry if I offended you in any way. I mean, if you're talking to me, I'm not offended. I'm trying to see through your comments to see if somebody was upset at some point. Okay. Let's see. Gregory Kong mentions that don't worry, soon everyone will be Hispanic or Latino in one way or another. Give us a few centuries. Possibly. Everybody will be some sort of mixed race, probably, because I think those racial barriers are definitely getting broken down now and are getting to be overcome. We've got a long way to go, clearly, but it's obviously better. It can be better. And I think people are definitely approving of interracial relationships. I saw a survey the other day, though, and it was really depressing because, again, it was in the United States, and it was like maybe 40% said that took the survey, or were like American adults or whatever. 40% said that interracial relationships weren't okay. And I'm thinking that's a really high percentage, right? I would have thought that it would be maybe like 10%. Your name cracks me up, and it's really hard to say too. Stripper liquor. I have a large interracial family, white, black, and mixed. Even when the family, there are differences in colorism, racism, and responses, reactions to various terms people use. For sure. I think, yeah. A lot of the things that I understand about racism and colorism, I acquired when I was in my adulthood, because my parents never talked to me about this stuff. I did have black friends, but we were talking about stupid stuff, and then people were saying, people were so dark they were purple, and that's it. That was as far as it had gone during my childhood and teenage years. It was only when I was in my 20s that I started looking into this stuff more, and I learned a lot. Now, I wish I had been more privy to this in my younger years, because then I think I could have understood. I was bullied a lot for my race. I was bullied by other students in my grade for my race, or for how I chose to wear my hair, because I was not straightening it with relaxer, which is basically a chemical that straightens people's hair, and it can be very damaging. I wasn't doing that, and I would, I had one girl say something to the effect of, I'm going to slap your hair straight, or something ridiculous like that. And I never really understood it, because I'm like, but our hair isn't naturally straight. And if we're proud of being who we are, we shouldn't be worried about making sure that it's mimicking European hair, right? The concept I could never connect the dots there when I was younger. But I was able to, obviously, in my older years. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about. I had some notes, and so I want to make sure that I got through all of the things that I mentioned. Yep. Okay. One thing that colorism does do, especially if you go to exclude somebody from your group with it, it's basically like if I were to do that to another individual and I said, "Hey, you do not pass whatever test that I have as far as race is concerned, so you are not allowed in my vicinity," or something stupid like that. If I were to do that, what I would be doing is I would be defining that individuals that I'm basically telling this to. I'm telling them what they should abide to. Basically, I'm telling them that this is, regardless of where you identify, regardless of how you identify, I'm the one that gets to identify you, and you don't get to tell me what your identity is at all. But I'm the one that tells you what your identity is, which is absurd to say the least. Nobody should be telling each other what their identity should be or is. If you identify, with the Black community and the white community, that's what you identify with. That's part of your identity. If you adopt one over the other, that again is your identity. And I don't think that it's appropriate to tell people what their identity should be and then strip that away from them too. So if somebody says, "Hey, Amanda or Andie, you're not Black," they're basically taking away my Blackness, essentially, even though we have a lot in common. Okay. Aaron A mentions that, and I guess I missed this comment, but someone mentioned earlier that colorism occurs in Hispanic communities too. Is this something about whiteness being the goal, or so how does this affect the community? Yeah, that's interesting. If like which direction that colorism is concerned within the Latino community. I know that there are Black Latinos for sure, and I think that they experience some sort of colorism where they're less preferred than their lighter Latino counterparts. And I think that this has to do with imperialist white supremacy, essentially, which is, what is the standard of beauty that's getting perpetuated through, culture, society, mass media, essentially, Hollywood. You don't see a lot of people of color in movies, and those get exported all over the world because the United States and everything like that is kind of an imperialist country. Let's just be real. And so we have exported our culture to other people's cultures. And that seems to have kind of taken precedence just because of that power dynamic. Because in the United States, by we, I mean, not me or you, but we as in the people that are in charge or in power, they exploit these other communities, other countries. And that exploitation is indicative of a power dynamic, that the people that are doing the exploiting have more power over the exploited. And so the closer you can identify to those people that are the exploiting people, I guess the better off you'll be, the more well off you'll be, because you have reached closer to their standard. Now, it doesn't mean that the main exploiters will accept you in their group. You may pass, you may be kind of like a tentative person that they're one of the good ones. You hear that often, unfortunately. That may happen, but it's definitely something that can be considered a global phenomenon. Gregory Kong answers and says, "Aaron, it depends on the country, but usually yes. Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. did a multi-episode documentary on Black people in Latin America." I forget the name. We can just look it up. I don't know if what this is in response to, but Christopher Freeman says, "I always wanted an afro, but my pops never let me grow one." I wonder why. Why? Okay. Time Surreal says, I was born in southern Italy and came to the US in the 50s when I was a kid. I was mocked and called names because people thought I was Mexican or Puerto Rican. Interesting. That's very interesting. And that's something that's must be aggravating to basically the world, is that Americans are really, really, really terrible about at identifying where other people come from. They don't care, and they should. As a culture or as a country, we should, as a collective body, care about the identity of that other people have and hold, and obviously not make fun of them for any of it. This is a complicated dynamic, but stripper liquor ads. Um, in our family, we have some blacks that are racist towards the whites, and vice versa. Both are against the interracial marriages, but they all accept the mixed kids, but also argue the kids' color. And doesn't that strike you how important race is? And but also how ridiculous that importance is at the same time. Because again, all it is just the amount of melanin you have in your skin. But for some reason, we believe it comes with all of these characteristics that definitely doesn't necessarily mean that they're there, right? And we put, we have that in a hierarchy for some reason. It's ridiculous, but again, we have to recognize that for some reason, we know why, it is insanely important. Okay, so Formerly Rodline asks, okay, if you want to know someone's identity, what do you do? I've been told it's rude and borderline racist to ask someone their background or heritage. That's a good question. I think it's all about how you approach the question. So, if you just met somebody and you ask them that, I think that's inappropriate, because there are so many other things you can ask about that individual outside of their race, essentially. But if you maybe know the person, have interacted with them multiple times and asked, I think that that's appropriate. If you just cannot tell, I wouldn't say, where are you from? I think that already implies that if they are native to your country, that they cannot be native because of the color of their skin. You can ask something like, "Hey, what is your racial makeup?" or something along those lines. What is your it's complicated. I don't know if heritage would capture that question well enough either. I just wouldn't say, where are you from? I wouldn't say, what was it? What's your nationality? Definitely wouldn't say that. But I think that over time you should be able to ask anybody, if you can't tell. Okay, so Aaron A asks, is race separation a ruling class way of dividing the workers and keeping them fighting each other? That is definitely a hypothesis that people have as far as that dynamic is concerned, because it does. It's very easy, right? It's a very easy way to identify people, based off of brown, not brown, essentially, is what happens. And if you are able to do that, then all you need to have is some sort of different power structure going on. So if the lighter skinned people have more power over the darker skinned people, there's going to be a natural conflict that occurs. And I think it is a good way to basically put workers against each other so that they don't realize that both of them are getting exploited by those on the top. We're not the ones that decided this dynamic at all. Like, we did not do that. It was those in power that did that. And so those, again, I keep saying this, and I know maybe one day it'll happen, but those in power do need to be held accountable for their actions, their bad actions, because they have killed enough people endlessly. They have ruined enough people's lives, period. And they never get held accountable, it seems like. Yeah, another one that I wouldn't ask is what Aaron A mentions. What are you? Don't do that either. That's not a good way to ask. Gregory Kong says, so where are you from? ASL. Miss those AIM days. Does anybody remember those? The ASL questions I was not on AIM, but I was in chat rooms when I was a kid, essentially. And everybody would always be like, ASL, like age, sex, location. And for some reason, you felt comfortable divulging your location because the internet was quite a different place during that time. Formerly Rodline mentions that, in my humble opinion, I believe our class issues are worse than our race issues, but at least want you focus on anything but them. I think that you cannot talk about class without talking about race within the United States. And so it's almost inseparable because slavery was such a big thing in the United States, and then Jim Crow laws was such a big thing in the US, and then continued discrimination is such a big thing based off of race. And that is a way to exploit workers. That is a class issue, because people that are at the lowest ends are probably going to be darker individuals. They're the ones that end up in prison the most, even though white people commit crimes at the same rate, or they even, get different sentences, even though they have the same, they've committed this same crime. Darker people will be punished basically for it more harshly than lighter skinned individuals. And I think that at the lowest end of the totem pole are prisoners, because all of their rights are gone. And so if we look to that and look at the dynamic that they have created, even within their own prison system, you will see a huge racial problem that arises. And that's usually the first thing that people will encounter, is that race dynamic. Sean Y says, people say, your English is very good. I always reply with, so is yours. That's an interesting thing to bring up, because that happens to a lot of Latinos and people that are visually, that people think are outside of the United States, that should have been born elsewhere in a non-English speaking country. I don't know why, but my camera keeps on adjusting this screen, so I noticed that. But where was I going with this? Oh yeah, but that also happens with white people talking to Black people too. I think Joe Biden did this to Barack Obama and said, like, oh, he's unusually articulate, or something along those lines, basically indicating that because of his skin color, he should not be able to use large words to make sense and to have white Americans easily understand what he's saying on the sole basis of his skin color. And so this is not something that just is lobbed at people that are considered quote unquote foreign. This is something that happens to Black people often. It's ridiculous. And of course, Joe Biden would do that because he's Joe Biden and he's kind of a racist. Gregory Kong mentions that race is also a class issue. Demographically, minorities are poorer, live in areas where education struggles. Healthcare is also an issue. Definitely, absolutely. And I don't think I think that, again, you cannot not talk about class without talking about race. You cannot think about class without thinking about race, at least in the United States, probably in various other parts of the world too. Like in the UK, this may also be a thing. I don't know. I'm not from the UK. So if if you are, or if you know, let me know, because I'm not sure how they handle it. But I know in the United States, it is a big issue. It is a big issue. And I think the two are essentially inseparable. And so there's always a argument that is being made on like in leftist spaces that, oh, we should focus on class. If we focus on class, we can prop up everybody, and then we'll focus on race or something along those lines. Or, oh, we should just focus on race, and then we can get with the class issues later, but the race issue needs to come first. And I honestly think that the two are pretty much inseparable in our current society. J-Dog says, poor white people don't exist. I think they exist. Poor white people do exist. We have to think of something that is also important. Poor and wealthy are relative terms, right? So poor in the United States may be different from poor in, where was somebody said they were from New Zealand, may be different from poor in New Zealand. And poverty is relative too. But I think a lot of people are under the impression that poverty doesn't exist in the United States, and that is untrue. And people are impoverished here. There are white people that are impoverished. Unfortunately, based off of the race dynamic, more proportionally will be Black, who are in abject poverty. But yeah. So that's really all I had as far as my stuff that I wanted to mention. I don't really have a good idea as to how we can kind of start removing this racial hierarchy and this colorist hierarchy. I have no idea. I think that exposure obviously helps. If you know, quote unquote, the other, if you have friends who are, quote unquote, the other, they are no longer the other. They are equitable to you. And so I think that is about the only way to go about this. And I think it will take several generations to basically remove this essential hierarchy, if not multiple generations. But again, the more people are exposed to each other, the less likely they will be to see them as the other. Formerly Rodline asks, similar to question before, what if you admire someone's way of speaking for real, not based on race? Okay. And if you want to compliment them, just say like, hey, I like how you talk, or something like that. You can say that I admire the way you talk, or I like how you sound, or something like that. There's no problem with doing that. But to say that somebody's like unusually articulate, I would not do that. Because it's with the assumption that the usual, the normal, I guess, way it should be is they should be inarticulate, right? So I wouldn't say anything like that, especially if that's not your intention at all, at all. Yeah, John Y says Morgan Freeman has voice of an angel. Yeah, he sounds great, I think. which is why he does a lot of voiceovers. Gregory Kong mentions, if riding with Biden wins this election, I'll play the Venga bus theme for 10 hours. Right. And Aaron mentions regarding your question, where was it? I don't know where your question is anymore. Regarding your question, Aaron adds that I think the idea is you shouldn't be referencing your predetermined expectations of them if you have them to begin with. I mean, if you have a predetermined expectation, I think it's time to do some self-reflection and go, why do I have this predetermined expectation in the first place? That would be a good place to start before you even branch out and try to compliment anybody for how articulate they are or something like that. Why is it that you think they shouldn't be articulate in the first place? I've had people mention that to me as well, as far as like, oh, you're so articulate, as if it was shocking. It's not a compliment at all. I can tell you that, because it's, again, with the assumption that I shouldn't be. Alrighty. Well, I have been going for 56 minutes, and that's kind of close to an hour for me, and because I haven't been feeling well. Yeah, but please be cognizant of the fact that this virus is going around everywhere. So if you have 4th of July, for those in the United States, if you have 4th of July plans and you plan on being in a crowd or in a large family get together, maybe second think that, especially if you yourself are vulnerable to having complications, or somebody you live with or close to is vulnerable to having severe complications, because I could not imagine how guilty I would feel if I got somebody sick that I love. Okay, cool. So Gregory Kong mentions that the series is called Black in Latin America and is available on PBS. I think I would like to see that. I'll probably see if I can find that. So just stay safe as always. Make sure put on a mask. You can breathe just fine with it on. And wash your hands, all that good stuff. Enjoy your weekend. Again, I think last time I was on, I said I would try to do something like this about once a week. That is still my plan. So I hopefully will see you next week, providing that I, again, don't get sick like I got before, and it delayed my talking with you guys. But I thank you guys so much for watching and being with me and actually chatting with me, because I like to hear what you have to say. I like your input as well. And I like the fact that you guys always add something for me as far as like my knowledge. Like I would love to learn more about what Gregory Kong mentioned. And so I think I will. But if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have even thought about learning more about it. So thank you guys so much. And I hope you have a great weekend. And don't get sick and all of that stuff. And yeah, so bye guys. I'm ending my stream.